It's D-Day, World War II, and Canada has joined the international struggle to politely ask Hitler to stop being a mass-murdering Nazi dickhead by sending her soldiers to kill as many Nazis as they can. Amongst the men charging the beaches of France that day is one Canadian infantryman serving with the Régiment de la Chaudière, Leo Major. In his early 20s, Major joined the Canadian military years earlier in a bid to prove to his estranged father that he was someone to be proud of. Major would soon prove that as he single-handedly helped put a considerable dent in the rapidly shrinking global supply of Nazis. Major manages to make it off the landing beach intact, while many around him are felled by German artillery and machine gun fire. Making his way past the bunkers guarding the beachhead, he stumbles across a German communications team working from the back of an armored truck. A proper Canadian through and through, Major proceeds to politely introduce himself to the Nazi soldiers with his bullets. Moments later, several dead Nazis are all that remains of the communications team, and Major has managed to single-handedly secure an incredible intelligence victory for the Allies. The armored truck is loaded down with German radios and code books, a veritable treasure trove that will allow the Allies to monitor German radio broadcasts for weeks to come. Days later, the Germans make a compelling counter-argument for the Allies to please leave Europe, sending huge formations of tanks and infantry against the Normandy beaches. The Allies sternly refuse the invitation to leave Europe in Nazi hands, and Major soon finds himself going up against a squad of elite Nazi Schutzstaffel, the feared SS. In a fierce firefight, Major and the men of his unit managed to destroy the SS, but not before one of the men threw a phosphorus grenade, which exploded and coated parts of Major's face with burning phosphorus. Rushed to a field hospital, Major suffered some burns to his face, but tragically, he also suffered the loss of his left eye, which the phosphorus had rendered blind. The medical officer in charge informed Major that his part in the war was done, and that he would soon be returned home. Major, however, had different plans. He marched straight to his commanding officer and demanded that he be allowed to remain, pointing out very obviously that he in fact had been born with two eyes, because God had seen fit to give him a spare just for this very reason. After proving that a man really only needed one eye to look down the barrel of a rifle or into a scope and kill Nazis, Major was allowed to stay. From then on, he would wear a trademark eye patch and begin referring to himself as a pirate, which, if you lose an eye killing 4 members of the most elite Nazi warriors, you totally get to do. From this moment on, Leo Major would become a bona fide Nazi-eradicating pirate sniper, and we double dog dare you to tell us of a more awesome job title in history. Canada's pirate sniper would fight across France, gradually helping the Allies push back the Nazis and liberating town after town. A year later, as Major joined Canadian forces fighting in the Netherlands, he was sent to scout alone for a patrol of fresh recruits who it was feared had gotten lost. Making his way to a small Dutch town in freezing cold rain, Major spotted 2 German soldiers walking along a dike and immediately took one prisoner, using him as bait to try to capture the other. The second soldier, however, possibly because he believed a real-life pirate had just time-traveled to the present and now demanded his surrender, panicked and tried to go for his weapon, forcing Major to shoot him dead. By now, the Allies had learned that Germans made some of the finest soldiers in the world because they were really good at listening to orders. So Major made his way to the unit's command post with his prisoner in tow and captured the unit's commanding officer. Major ordered the German to surrender his unit, and because if you yell at a Nazi loud enough with an authoritative voice, they pretty much do what you tell them to do, the majority of the German unit surrendered. 3 men, however, raised objection to being captured by a single, possibly time-traveling Canadian pirate, and Major silenced those objections by killing them dead. Marching his nearly 100 prisoners back to Allied lines, nearby Waffen-SS unit saw an entire unit being held prisoner by a single man and opened fire. Major, however, considered this nothing more than a rude interruption of his afternoon stroll and ignored the SS troops, though the SS managed to kill 7 of their own and injure several others. Upon returning back to friendly lines, Major was chosen to receive the Distinguished Conduct Medal, the oldest British medal for gallantry, and second only to the Victoria Cross. Major, however, refused the medal, as if he accepted it, then it would be British General Bernard Montgomery who pinned it on his chest. And in Major's view, Montgomery was a puffed-up blowhard interested only in his own glory. Given the fact that Montgomery had just sacrificed the lives of thousands of Allied paratroopers in the disastrous Operation Market Garden 2 months prior, Major had a rather good point. when a secret Nazi program to travel back in time to stop the first pirate from being born, so that Major would never exist, failed to stop his rampage across Europe, it would be a mine that nearly knocked Canada's pirate sniper out of the fight for good. In February 1945, Major was assisting a military chaplain load German corpses from a burned-out Tiger tank into an armored personnel carrier. The chaplain and the driver then sealed themselves in the front compartment, while Major rode in the back with the dead. Minutes later, the APC ran over an anti-tank mine, and later Major would recall that he remembered only hearing a loud blast and the feeling of being thrown up into the air and coming down hard on his back. He would awake later to two medical officers doing their best to treat the wounds across Major's body, which had very suddenly developed an allergic reaction to landmine explosions. Drifting into consciousness, the first thing Major asked was if the chaplain was okay, though the medics ignored the question. The chaplain and the driver had both been killed in the blast. Major was rushed to a hospital, the truck having to stop every 15 minutes so that the medics could administer a fresh morphine injection for the terrible pain in his back. Drifting in and out of consciousness, Major eventually was made stable, though the doctors had terrible news for him. He had broken his back in 3 places. He had also shattered 4 ribs and both ankles. The war was over for Leo Major. The Nazis had at last eliminated their pirate sniper scourge. Or that's what would have happened if Major hadn't sought out a second opinion on his injuries from himself. A week later, Major fled the military hospital, and we have to remind you here that he did this with a back broken in 3 places, 4 shattered ribs, and while fleeing on 2 broken ankles. If the military was going to be stupid enough to send him home for something as measly as a debilitating, crippling injury, then he would just have to get away from the military for a while. Hitching a ride to the Dutch town of Nijmegen, Major stayed with a family he had met while previously passing through the area. The family gladly took him in, and Major informed his broken body that it had exactly 30 days to fix itself before Major would return to the business of killing Nazis. Major would end up only giving his shattered bones 28 days to heal though, as everyone knew that the war would be winding down soon and there'd be no more Nazis to crush, at least not until 2018. Major returned to his unit, and luckily for the Allies, his commander decided that it would be best not to punish the man who had single-handedly captured almost 100 Nazis just for going AWOL so he could avoid being sent home. A month later, Major would repeat this incredible feat, though in a far more spectacular fashion. When asking for volunteers for a dangerous recon mission, Major and his best friend Corporal Willy Arsenault both stepped forward. They would be tasked with reconning the Dutch city of Zwolle, which was currently under the control of Nazis. Their mission was to discover the number of German defenders and then contact the Dutch resistance, so that later a full assault could be launched on the town. After arriving at Zwolle, Major and Arsenault decided that a full-blown battle would devastate the beautiful little town, and so instead, they chose the next rational course of action. Simply captured the entire town by themselves. Defended by well over 100 Germans, the duo snuck into the town with the same trick in mind that Major had used earlier in the war. Simply capture the commanding officer and order the Germans to surrender, then shoot any that decline. Unfortunately, Arsenault gave away the two's position and a firefight erupted, during which Arsenault was killed. This proved to be a slight mistake for the Germans, as watching his best friend get gunned down drove Major to go all Super Saiyan and murder the living crap out of 2 of the Germans before the other dozen fled for their lives. Still, Major persisted with his self-appointed mission, knowing that a full-scale battle would devastate the civilians trapped in the town. Ambushing a German officer, Major told the man that Canadian artillery would begin firing on the town at 6 a.m., causing untold casualties amongst the Germans and civilians alike. Believing that they were facing insurmountable odds, the Germans agreed that holding the town would be foolish, and so Major returned his weapon to him and let him leave unharmed, hoping that the officer would warn the rest of the Germans about the terrible bombardment they would soon be facing. Then Major decided to fool the rest of the Germans into believing that the town was under full-scale attack by Canadian forces, and thus he ran across the town like a madman, firing his submachine gun and throwing grenades, making such a racket that the Germans were fooled into believing the Canadians were attacking. As he ran across the town raising hell, Major would regularly run into groups of German soldiers, and 10 times throughout the night, he captured groups of up to 10 men and ran them back to the Canadian troops waiting outside the town. After handing over each batch of prisoners, Major simply rushed back into the town to keep waging World War II all by himself and do it all over again. Eventually, he discovered the Gestapo HQ and set the building on fire. When he then discovered the SS headquarters by accident, he got into a close-quarters firefight that saw 4 Nazis dead and the other 4 flee for their lives. By 4:30 a.m., all the German soldiers in the town had ran for their lives, and Major had successfully captured an entire city by himself. For this feat, Major was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, which he accepted this time. Sadly for Major, World War II was soon over, and he returned to civilian life to work as a pipe fitter. Just 5 years later, though, the Korean War broke out, and while it wouldn't be the same as killing Nazis, Major decided that killing communists would simply have to do. He volunteered for service and he joined a scout and sniper platoon. A few years later, ceasefire talks were planned between both sides. Knowing that a ceasefire would lock each side's forces into their current positions, both sides attempted to capture strategic positions they could hold on to and reinforce during the ceasefire. In one corner of the war, American troops held a spot known as Hill 355, a commanding position which allowed whichever side that held it to control over 20 miles of terrain around it. The Chinese decided that they wanted that hill for themselves and sent 40,000 men against the US's 3rd Infantry. After 2 days of fighting, the Americans were forced to retreat, and after a failed counterattack, the hill remained in Chinese hands. To make matters worse, the Chinese army had also taken up position on Hill 227, near Hill 355, which in effect left UN forces nearly surrounded. Major, now in command of his own platoon of scout snipers, was immediately dispatched to shore up Canadian and American defenses. However, deciding that the best defense is a good offense, Major once more chose to creatively interpret his orders and led his men as they snuck into the middle of Chinese positions on Hill 355 in the dead of night. At a signal from Major, the men all opened fire, and the Chinese, confused and panicked at why and how they were being fired at from within their own ranks, fled the hill. An hour later, though, the Chinese regrouped in 2 divisions numbering at a staggering 14,000 men, launched a counterattack. Reinforced with some Canadian and American troops, the UN forces were still hopelessly outnumbered. And yet, the Chinese had failed to take into account the fact that Major was in fact a certified Nazi-murdering pirate sniper. Major's own commanding officers also failed to take that fact into account. And when he was ordered to retreat, Major noted that there was little if any cover for his men if they tried to make a run for it. And thus he declined the order and proceeded to politely request the Chinese get off his hill by killing hundreds of them. Holding against incredible odds for an entire night, Major would go on to earn his 2nd Distinguished Conduct Medal. After the Korean War, Major settled into his civilian life and raised a son to ensure that the pirate bloodline would not end. He would return to the Dutch city of Zwolle regularly and befriend its inhabitants, who thanked him each time for liberating their city and sparing them the horror and suffering of being caught in a full-blown battle. The city would go on to honor him by naming a major road after him. And in 2008, Major would finally be laid to rest at the age of 87. Or at least that's the official story. And we here at the Infographics channel believe that as a possible time-traveling pirate, Major actually left our timeline to find Earths in an alternate dimension where Hitler had won, liberating one timeline after another from the rule of Nazi dickheads. Think you would have had what it took to fight alongside Leo Major? Did the Nazis really try to stop him from being born by traveling back in time and killing the first pirate? Let us know in the comments. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more great content.